be aware, in an all-day insurance colloquium with people from across the region and hemisphere, our development partners, on this vexatious issue of insurance and climate crisis. But I did not want this debate to close without my participation, lest it be felt that there is an absence of political will, because there is not. In every generation, new sectors and new initiatives will come along. And it is of significance that for some time now, there has been a clear recognition that the medicinal properties in the cannabis plant are of significant value to human beings, particularly for different types of ailments. It is significant for me, Mr. Speaker, sir, that as far back as 1842, and I quote from the document put out by Time magazine on medicinal cannabis, I believe others in here may have referred to it in their speeches, that from as far back as 1842, William O'Shaughnessy conducted clinical trials that determined that it was an effective muscle relaxant and anticonvulsive. Now for me, sir, I'm not a doctor, and for me, the first appreciation and understanding of the medicinal properties probably came when I was a much younger person, and we heard people speak about the palliative nature of cannabis for persons who were having chemotherapy. Then we learned about the link with glaucoma. Then we learned about the benefits to persons suffering from epilepsy or indeed other nervous disorders. And more, as the knowledge became clear and shared, and as the parallel story of where cannabis was in our civilization became known, it became clear that we needed to take off whatever rose-tinted glasses we may have had before and to let us follow the science. Go where the science is taking us. And in going where the science is taking us, sir, it became clear that as far back as 1975, the New England Journal of Medicine reported that THC successfully reduced chemotherapy-related nausea and vomiting in cancer patients for whom standard antiemetics were ineffective. In the next year, a gentleman by the name of Robert Randall became the first legal medical marijuana smoker since 1937 after suing the United States government for access to cannabis to treat his glaucoma. Now, I contextualize these things because for some reason, we are more prepared to accept traditional Western science than the stories of our ancestors and those who traveled before us. Because if I were to refer to that, it would become absolutely clear that the work done by the CARICOM Commission on Marijuana, for all types of marijuana, not just medicinal, says at page 1 in the executive summary, and I feel compelled to read it into the record of this House, because as you know, we are a member of the Caribbean community, and indeed a Barbadian served on the Commission, and I'll come to the members of the Commission shortly. But it is important for us to locate it within the context of our own civilization as Caribbean people. And I quote, sir, "Cannabis or marijuana, has deep historical, cultural, and religious significance to Caribbean peoples. It can be traced to several ethnic, religious, and cultural traditions within Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, and from ancient times was known throughout history as a substance with healing properties. It was introduced during the post-emancipation period to the Caribbean countries of Jamaica, Trinidad, and Tobago, and Guyana by the East Indian indentured laborers. The designation of cannabis or marijuana as an unlawful substance and a dangerous drug is of relatively recent vintage. For most of our history, cannabis was a free substance grown naturally and easily throughout the region. Indeed, many CARICOM citizens have memories of their grandparents and forefathers using cannabis in a benign fashion, such as bash tea, before the advent of prohibition, or at least its strict enforcement. In spite of the social significance of cannabis, the cultivation and importation of it was officially criminalized in 1913 under the Opium Law in Jamaica. And the subsequent legislation expanded the scope of prohibition. Criminalization elsewhere in the region came in the 1930s pursuant to the 1937 Dangerous Drug Ordinance in the UK, stick a pin, at the very same time in the United States, after the movie in the 1937 of Reefer Madness, a similar approach was being taken on that side of the Atlantic in the United States of America. I continue. These were responses to international treaty formation which deemed cannabis a dangerous drug without value, despite the lack of scientific or medical data to support this classification, a status that has now been proven to be inaccurate. There is evidence that its acquisition of an illegal status was due to attempts to stifle competition with alcohol, which had just emerged out of prohibition itself. Always comes back down to economics, Mr. Speaker. Harsh criminal penalties were imposed on cannabis in all its forms within the context of strict liability. So all who are lawyers know that once you have it, there's no excuse for having it, you're liable to the penalty. This led to the demonization of the substance and the criminalization and imprisonment of many persons in the Caribbean, often for possessing small amounts of the substance and even when using for medicinal purposes. Now I contextualize the wider discussion, but to come narrow. And I do so, but before coming narrow, I do so conscious that as far back as 1987, one of the bastions of Western capitalism, The Economist magazine, ran a supplement indicating that in its view, the world needed to confront the reality of the decriminalization of cannabis in particular. It argued for one or two others, but cannabis in particular, and that many of the problems that we were seeing happening came from lack of regulation because of the inability to appropriately regulate many of the substances. The then member for St. Michael South Central, and I'll never forget it, the late Sir Richard Christopher Haynes, engaged with me and a few others in continuous discussion relating to us that part of the difficulty that we will face as a society is that we will have to confront the reality that by criminalizing a large part of our population, they would come to disrespect the rule of law, and that we were doing so while still not being able to deal with the underlying addiction problems, because as far as mankind has existed, that the rate of addiction has been in the vicinity of 8 to 10% of all human beings that have some kind of addictive disorder. Now, put that and park that one side, as it has been for the last 2.5 decades. And what we started to see emerge more and more, and I remember as Minister of Home Affairs being responsible for engagement of the National Council of Substance Abuse, and being involved in seminars and conferences where up until the turn of the century, there was a belief among many of those countries within Latin America, with the exception of the United States of America, and at that stage still Canada, that there ought to be no move to be able to legitimize this process. So that even though other countries within the region were saying that, like Europe, which had started the process of decriminalization or the reduction of the seriousness in the case of the United Kingdom, that the US and Canada were among the last to hold out. And all of a sudden in the 21st century, there was an about turn. And the about turn came both for medicinal cannabis, but also for recreational cannabis with respect to some of them. To the point where the Canadians have, in fact, legalized the use of both. In the United States of America, there's been an exceedingly wise strategy for themselves, because what they have effectively done by making cannabis legal at the state level and illegal at the federal level is to prohibit the trading in cannabis or outsiders coming in to be able to in any way compete with the domestic market that they have created for their own population within the individual states. So you have 33 states, of which 10 have legitimized both, and 33 across the board for medicinal cannabis. Uruguay, Israel, South Africa, within the region Jamaica, Antigua, St. Vincent and the Grenadines with respect to medicinal cannabis, and in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, sacramental cannabis. This party was very clear at the outset in the last election. And we indicated that on the issue of recreational cannabis, we believed that it was a wedge issue, and that we would take no decision as a government on wedge issues, but that we would go to the people for a conversation which is still yet to come, and which we will have to do at some point in the future, near future. With respect, however, to medicinal cannabis, we made the point that we felt strongly enough to commit to it. Because, as I said, this government will go, as with climate change, where the science takes us. And the science has been absolutely clear with respect to the medicinal properties that cannabis has. And what we have seen is research being done in Israel, in Canada, other parts of the world, to the point where there is clear evidence of its ability to be able to assist persons, particularly, as I said, with neurological disorders and with cancer as a palliative, a pain inhibitor. Now, Mr. Speaker, I start from this point because Barbados, in engaging in a new economic sector, must not simply do so in a normal way. We are too small, and we have to be strategic in how we engage. And this government from the beginning, and we've said so publicly, has felt that our engagement in this sector has to be first and foremost based on science and research. This country has had a distinguished history in agronomic research. And as a result, we believe that the significant strides which have already been made in the use of medical marijuana can be built upon to ensure that persons can create opportunities with respect to the different usages and the different dosage required for the different ailments in the utilization of medicinal cannabis. Similarly, we recognize that our international business sector is premised primarily with business coming out of Canada in circumstances where there is significant economic activity in both medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis. But with respect to the medicinal cannabis in particular, that because Canadians have traditionally used Barbadian companies or Barbados as a domicile for Canadian companies, it would be difficult for them to be able to do so in circumstances where this would not be permissible here. We recognize, without prejudice to that there will be some issues that I believe that the Minister of International Business will speak to that may require additional amendments by the Honourable Attorney General to ensure that those working in the farm labour program of Barbadian extract may not find themselves in jeopardy simply because they're participating in a farm labour program that has existed for decades, but that they have been assigned to a farm that may be involved in the farming of both medicinal or recreational cannabis. And we need to protect their wages from being considered as the proceeds of crime if they go up there and work in a way that does not necessarily impose on us any obligation one way or the other with respect to recreational cannabis. We need also to recognize that the value chain that was robbed of us from modern settlement with respect to initially tobacco and then with sugar cannot be robbed from us again, especially now that we have the conduct of our own affairs in our hands. And I refer specifically to the export of agricultural commodities as a bulk commodity for others to add the value and extract the profits from the additional value added that they have placed on. And what do I mean specifically? The medicinal cannabis that is grown in this country under license is just the agricultural commodity. But we have now to perfect adding value. And we first can add value through processes that will lead either to the oils or to medication, subject to the appropriate protocols. We can add value in addition to that manufacturing process by equally having spas and pain management clinics that allow us to be able to better manage our business of hospitality with the business of medical services. And for those who wonder why and how, I remind them simply that George Washington came to only one country in the world, and it was Barbados, in order to accompany his brother who needed the respiratory and therapeutic treatment that he received in Barbados in order to be able to live, to survive. So that this country for centuries has been a location for recuperation for persons facing medical ailments. And if we can, in structuring out this industry as a new productive sector, manage the agricultural component, manage the manufacturing component, manage the tourism and hospitality component, and manage the international business component, then we will have, in a total way, Mr. Speaker, be able to extract maximum value from this particular product, which for the majority of our history was in fact legal and not illegal. Mr. Speaker, it brings then the question frontally to the fact that how do you create space for local investment? Because you cannot simply be facilitating foreign direct investment with respect to the growing of this industry. And we have been very, very clear as a government that there has to be a level of local participation with respect to the growing of it, and that there must also be, separate from that, dedicated licenses available for Barbadians, separate and without prejudice to their local participation with any foreign direct investment, because in a very real way, those who have carried the burden of imprisonment, those who have carried the burden of shame, those who have carried the burden must not simply be looking in from the outside when it comes now to the facilitation of a legal framework that makes sense for the country. They must not be looking in from the outside. And this government has been very, very clear, very, very, very clear, that we have not come to office to govern for the few, and that we will make wrong things right, and we will create opportunities for our people. And what is of significance, and I believe the Minister for Home Affairs may have referred to it this morning, and the Attorney General will speak far more at length on it this afternoon, that we have to come to grips with our identity as Caribbean people too. And our identity as Caribbean people cannot have us recognizing religions known to the Midwest of the United States of America, or known to Asia, or known to Africa even, or known to parts of Europe, but religions that are born of the Caribbean civilization become ignored. And Mr. Speaker, I speak to you. If only Hansard could capture a picture. I speak to you. He may well be an Anglican now. But I speak to you who, as a person who has had to go into the courts all too often to defend persons in circumstances where I can say definitively the difference in attitude of the prison with regard to the respecting of the rights of Rastafarians from the time I was first admitted to the bar to the recognition now that people have a right to have their religious rights respected under the Constitution of
Honourable Prime
Barbados.
Minister, R. versus Hines.
And Mr. Speaker, in referring and routing you to the court, I knew you would have supplemented that information, because you know that I am not permitted to practice law anymore. But suffice it to say that as far away as Kenya, the jurisprudence is recognizing the legitimacy of the religion. Now, I say that conscious that we are going to have, at some point, to have a further discussion. And up to last night, I made the point that we cannot reach 53 or 54 years old as a nation and not have the difficult discussions, because the difficult realities are among us. And if we choose to avoid the discussion, it is not going to shut down the realities that are among us. And to that extent, therefore, we believe that we can find a mechanism that respects the rights of individual Rastafari to be able to practice their religion and to use their sacrament, while at the same time not prejudicing the right of the nation to move towards the discussion on recreational marijuana. What I can say is this, that at a personal level, not the government, at a personal level, I believe that the rule of law is the most important thing with respect to human beings living in the same space. Because if there is no rule of law, other than the right to breathe and to live, the rule of law determines the stability of society. And if we have a situation where many of our citizens are becoming criminals, in inverted commas, having been convicted, we then deprive them of the opportunity to live fulfilling lives in circumstances where, as I said, less than 100 years ago, and for the majority of our modern settlement, this was not a criminal offense. It was not even illegal. So it brings us to the very reality that in the conduct of the affairs of geopolitics, legislation was passed. We were colonies, and we continued with it. But when we stop now to look at the science, and we look at the reality of who is investing in medical cannabis, There's an article, and I make it a document of the House, from Forbes magazine, entitled "The Church of England's $10.5 billion fund will now invest in cannabis." And it speaks very clearly to the fact that the Church of England has an investment arm in a fund called the Church Commissioners for England Fund that currently manages about £8.3 billion or $10.5 billion in assets. This article is dated the 13th of June of this year. And it makes it absolutely clear that, according to the Financial Times, Edward Mason, who is head of the Responsible Investment for the Church Commissioners Fund, said the organization was making a clear distinction at this time and was investing in medical cannabis. Not recreational, medical cannabis. Now, Mr. Speaker, the United States of America has entered patents, filed patents. 2003, 16 years ago, the United States government received a patent for the therapeutic use of cannabinoids as antioxidants and as neuroprotectants. Now, I can stand here all afternoon if I had time and carry the country through the science and the reality of what is happening globally. And one of the things that disturbs me is that in the same way we were prevented from being able to extract value from sugar, down to today we're still fighting to do it. Treated as a bulk commodity for others to make money on. We are at risk in this region for a very product that was part and parcel of our civilization. And I'm not going to get in today about the virtues of soursop leaf tea and other types of bush tea, in some instances which may be hallucinogenic too. But that we have to define our own reality and manage our own destiny with a moral compass, yes, but recognizing that what has been placed upon us for the last 7 or 8 decades has been a reality that was not born of our parliaments or our people, but was imposed upon us. Now, I say this without prejudice to the fact that we must still, at all costs, recognize that just because something is permissible, it should not be abused. There are people in this parliament who drink alcohol. That does not make them abusers of alcohol. I see everybody shaking their hands. There are people in this parliament who smoke cigarettes. Mercifully, I can say today that I do not smoke. 2 years and 10 months. Remember, for St. Andrew is telling me, do not talk about more addictive behavior. I bow to his wisdom. But suffice it to say that the bigger problem, if you talk to people working with young people in this country, is in fact something called blackies and other types of tablets which are being used actually with other kinds of substances that are entirely available over the counter because they're called cough medicine. When I was a student in England, the issue and the problem was glue inhalation. And this carries me back, therefore, to the comments from Sir Richard, that part and parcel of understanding human beings is understanding that there will always be some kind of addictive behavior to create an alternative reality from what exists. Now, what must we and what shall we do at all costs? There is no reason for any young person to be smoking cigarettes, marijuana, drinking alcohol under the age of 18. And I don't say so lightly. I say so meaning what I say. And especially for those who believe that they have and want to have the ability to be able to have a sporting career. I ask people all the time, and I tell people in communities as I go around, take care of your young people and make sure that they don't do things that they shouldn't be doing, especially if they are trying to be the best that they can be with respect to sporting careers. I am not naive, and therefore I know that there will always be people who will try a thing. But let's get serious. If you feel you have a serious football or cricket career or netball or tennis or whatever, and even if it is just road tennis because you're playing hard, then you ought not to be doing those things. And if those people who were around Usain Bolt or Shelly Ann Fraser allowed them to do that when they were growing up, would they have achieved what they have achieved now in life? The bottom line is that adults will make adult decisions. But even as we seek to be able to create these opportunities, we have to be able to talk to our young people to ensure that they treat their body with respect and that they understand the benefits as well as the disadvantages of all substances. I'm not talking about cannabis alone, I'm talking about every substance, including tin food. Because I feel that anything in a tin needs a preservative or a chemical to remain fresh. And that does as much damage to the body as anything else. So that everything in moderation, the Chinese say. Everything in moderation, our own elders say. But what we have to have is a clear understanding and appreciation that there are certain things that you shouldn't do. I remember as a child, my grandmother refusing to let me drink coffee. You could not drink coffee as a child because they said it was not good for children. You had to drink Milo or Horlicks or cocoa. Eventually you were allowed tea, and we subsequently understood that the tea had as much caffeine, or in some instances more, than the coffee. So that we knew that there were things that children could do and there were things that children could not do. The Minister of Housing is reminding me of the prevalent use of Cersei bush in this society. Bay leaf tea. I'm not sure how many of them want to admit to bash tea, because that will have its own problems. But the bottom line is that we come from a society and from a civilization where people use bush to heal people. That's the bald reality, Mr. Speaker. And it didn't start in our generation, and it's not going to end in our generation. But what we need to do is to be able, like others, to look and do the scientific research and with greater precision see what can be done to heal people. I know a young man, Mr. Speaker, and this perhaps a couple of years ago was one of the turning points for me at a personal level. His daughter suffers from multiple sclerosis. She is Canadian. He is Bajan. He takes her and used to take her up to Canada for treatment and access to medication. He said on the first occasion that they gave his daughter the drops under her tongue, when he saw within less than 2 minutes her complete change, that he knew he was prepared to go into any dock to face any charge, because anything that could bring that kind of healing and that kind of relief to his child could not, in his eyes, be illegal for any reason. Now, that's his view. But our view as a government is, because we are premised, or we have a society that is premised on the rule of law, we have a duty not just to have that maverick approach that he exhibited, but we had to ask ourselves the difficult questions, and the difficult questions were answered not today, sir, but at page 25 of the Barbados Labour Party's manifesto, where under the heading Medical Marijuana, we say simply, significant strides have been made in the use of marijuana in pain management and for the treatment of a range of medical complaints. The Barbados Labour Party will not deny Barbadians access to modern treatment modalities. Accordingly, the Barbados Labour Party will legalize the use of medical marijuana. This is step one in what really is a three-step process. The recreational cannabis, marijuana, I've committed to the country. We are staying consistent with our promise in the manifesto that we will put it to a referendum. With respect, and that is at page 10 of the manifesto, for the decriminalization of recreational cannabis. And the whip will be off, because I'm aware that the leader of the Democratic Labour Party has said that she believes it should be decriminalized. Bishop Adderley, the member for St. Michael West will speak in his own deliberate way in this, but he and I have had conversations. Sorry? I don't want to name you in here. But the bottom line is that the whip will be off when the time comes, because I accept that there may be one or two members who may, for whatever reason, have a different perspective. But the decision will not be this Parliament's, it will be the people of Barbados when that time comes. But in the interim, we cannot go to celebrate in the month of November 53 years of independence and deny that there are citizens among us who choose a God to worship that is theirs in the image and in the language and in the idiom and in the manner in which the Rastafari community has chosen to do it. And they must be respected in the same way that we respect those who choose other religions, be it Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, whatever.